Okay. How's everyone doing? How's the homework? Easy? No. Just like, were you able to solve those problems? Okay.
Yeah.
Did you use constructors?
Yes.
Okay. Nice. All right. So since you use constructor, I guess you can explain it. Can someone walk me through what the constructors are? Vishal? What's a constructor?
What's a constructor? It basically has the same name as your method. That's one of the things.
Same name as my method.
The class name and the.
You're tired.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Constructor is a block of code that is just like the method, and it has the same name as the class name, and it's used to initialize an object of the same class.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And it can take parameters, right? So
There's
that's
no
fine.
return type.
Yes.
No return type.
All right. You guys did your homework. That's good. Yes, you got to be able to like kind of try to explain it, and it's easier to kind of, someone can easily understand. This homework could have been done many ways, long as you're able to solve it. That's all I care. But this is one way of thinking of it. So you can obviously first initialize the toner level, page is printed, and a duplex, right? Duplex is just to see if it's both sided or not, right? So you could put it true or false in here. So that's one way to think it. And then you can kind of just do the constructor to do all your setting like a logic, right? So you can put it here. You could have done it in other places, bring it up here, that's fine. The two things I want to take, and I think based off what we had in our app, if you look at, we were taking toner level and duplex. So there's certain decision you had to kind of make initially. You had to set the toner level, and you also had to set if it's both sided or not, right? So what we're saying is if toner level is greater than -1, which is maybe 0, right? So that's fine. Greater than -1 and toner level is less than equals to 100, we're going to set the toner level, whatever toner level you pass in, we're going to set it to this field variable. Make sense? If it only fits in with that conditions. Otherwise, I'm going to set it to -1. So the reason I want to use -1 here is that a lot of time you might write code, and if you do console.out, you will see -1. That means it's incorrect. Make sense? So instead of throwing, once we kind of learn, better, programming, I guess not better programming, like there's another topic called exceptions, right? So we can do something like that, right? And say, I don't know, can't do it, right? So we can do those things, but we're not there yet. So for now, we're gonna deal with -1. So like early days of coding, that was one of the standard. Like -1 means, hey, something is wrong here, right? It's not working. So there might be a code basis that, but again, reality, we won't be doing -1. There is better libraries to help us out with more descriptive messages, right? But that's something we can do. All right. So that pretty much handles it when you are setting it up, right? When we are setting it up, that logic should be all right, and we've tested it and it kind of works. And then you have whatever the duplex is, we'll set it to that. If it's true, if it's true. If it's false, if it's false. So that's what we are doing, setting here. We are not in the printed page yet. Once we're printing the page, we'll check against the duplex, whatever the user set initially, right? Because if you, I mean, we don't really set the toner level when we print stuff. It's kind of already there. But if you really think about it, you make those decisions. How many, duplex, how many pages you want to print. All of those decisions are like, you make it on this kiosk type of, display. So, we can do that. And initially, pages printed, you want to make sure you set that to 0 because we are not printing anything at a constructor level. Make sense? So by default, we will just set it to 0.
I have a question. What's the difference if we put it equals 0 or if we put this print page and that's it?
What do you mean?
Default.
Yeah, I mean by default is 0 anyway, right? So, but I like to explicitly say that here. Does that make sense? So to answer your question, you don't even have to do this. So by default, it's always going to be 0, all right? But that's fine. We can also explicitly tell the audience, no, we know what we are doing. During the constructor time, we are going to set it to 0. If someone were to do something somewhere else, they set this value somewhere, we can reset it to 0.
Oh.
Okay? So, but that's a good observation. You can also, by default, when you don't specify anything, that's what Gia is saying. By default, if you don't specify anything, it's 0 anyway, right? So he's saying, why are you initializing? And this is a kind of like a double check, all right? And then we have a logic for add toner, which is, what we're saying is, hey, if toner amount, so you set the toner amount. So here you have to write a little bit of an extra logic because you're not just setting the toner level. What you're doing is you're adding it. So you have to first check the existing, right? And then do some computation to add that value to the existing toner, right? So you're saying, hey, if the toner amount is greater than 0 and toner amount is less than 100, then only you want to deal with whatever you want to deal with. If it's outside of the boundary, I don't want to have anything to do with it anyway. I don't want to add. So if you say, oh, the toner amount is 200, well, there's no point of even doing any computations. So I want to kind of get that out first. So, and then, remember when we talked about nested if statements? So this is a good condition where first I'm checking, does it even meet the first condition? If the first condition is true, now let's come in and let's see what we can do. And here saying, if toner level, whatever the current toner level is, plus the toner amount that you gave me, right, that you want to add, is it greater than 100? Because if it's greater than 100, I want to return -1 again, because that's not correct. We cannot set toner greater than 100. So if your current toner level was 70 and you wanted to add 40 more, you should come back as a -1 because I don't want you to, you can't go above 100. So that's what this logic is kind of doing. But if it's not that condition, then that's fine, right? So like let's say if the current, if the current toner level is 50 and you wanted to add 30 more, this doesn't even go into this logic, right? And then what's going to happen is it's just going to go into this code base and we're going to add that toner amount to the existing toner level, and then we just return that toner level, right? But if, let's say, if the condition was false here, we are returning -1 again.
So instead of second if the highlighted lines, can we just put this logic in the first if with the end statement and just set toner amount greater than 0 and toner amount?
We could probably do it, yeah. So but that's one other way to do it. Like I said, this could be done many different ways. So if you have done it a different way and it worked, that's fine. That means you're in the right track, right? I just wanted to, one thing is like also like solving problems from a different angle and also showing the -1 usage here a lot, right? But if the very first logic was incorrect, we never even do any of that stuff, right? But if second logic is correct, then we just get out of here, right? Because there's nothing else to do. If this was, let's say, false, then we actually setting the toner. and we don't even go into the else statement because you're returning it. The point you return it and that becomes true, none of the other code gets executed at all, right? So you can put return at any point as long as it's making sense. When do you want to kind of jump out of the code base? Kind of like a break statement. And I don't want to give that example to explain it, but return is kind of like a break, right? Okay, my statement became true. I'm going to return something. I'm done here. Let's move on. And then this one is pretty simple, right? So we're saying pages to print. So whatever the pages to print here, we're saying, okay, whatever pages you're setting here, and then we're saying if it's duplex, pages to print divided by, and then setting that new value. If it's true, if duplex is true, we just divide it by 2, right? So if the pages were 50, we divided by 2. Now the total pages of print is 25, right? But that's only if the duplex is equals to true, right? Otherwise, we don't even come into this logic. Whatever the pages to print, we pretty much add that to that printed page, right? And then we also need to subtract the tonal level, right? Every time you print some pages, we need to subtract the tonal level. Well, this printer is kind of really bad type of printer. You can only do it up until 100, and then tonal level comes down. But just to kind of give you guys a perspective of how it is. So this logic pretty much will subtract and fulfill this requirement, right? So example, toner single page equals to single tonal level, right? So every time you print a page, we need to also subtract toners. And then finally, you have two getters, right? If any point you want to see how many pages were printed, if any point you wanted to see what your current tonal level is, you just kind of go ahead and print it. What I would do is I'll just share this code with you. So,
There is one bug. There is one bug.
which is it?
Duplex set.
What's up with that?
It doesn't minus the tonal level.
You sure about that?
Yeah.
Let's try it out. Can you predict what the answer would be? So we do a toner level, setting it up to 40. We are doing a duplex, which is true, right? Current toner level, print.get toner level, and then current page count, we get page printed, and then we add another toner here, which is another 60, and then we print pages.
50.
How many pages are printing here? 50. So the total tonal level should be what? 10, right? In theory. The toner is 10. Last time, right? I fixed the bug. So I wasn't going to show you a buggy code. You caught the bug last time, but you can't catch it again without looking at the code. So that's fine. Yeah, so you just have to kind of make sure, because I'm subtracting it, regardless it's true or false, I don't care. I'm still subtracting based on the pages that you're passing, right? So I take bug personal. No, I'm just kidding. All right, I guess I'll just share this code, and then you guys can play around with it again compared to your code base. Okay. So we're going to today's exercise is we are actually going to be building an application for banks, right? So banks have accounts, customers, and all of that. how do you put things? So it's kind of like like a true object-oriented programming, right? How do we move things around? And then your homework assignment will be to add on to that. So like let's say that bank has a new functionality and you need to add on to it. And you have to make a decision what kind of method you have to make, how would you write your logic and all of that stuff. So it's gonna be really good exercise, but this whole before we even get to the code base, we have to understand what are those things that we are talking about, right? And so that's kind of takes us to this topic today, because last thing, well, package, I just want to spend maybe 2 minutes here. It's not much, right? Package is kind of like how we have our folders, right? And so package is used to avoid names conflict, control process classes, right? So you can read this a little bit more if you want. I'm not too concerned about it because I think you guys already kind of have it. So package are, you see how these are? Basics, class objects, date, enums, right? These are kind of what? Packages, right? And then inside of a package, you have a class. The reason we want to do this so that we can avoid name conflicts every time. So like, let's say you may have an object called customer, which is inside of inheritance, and you can have an object customer also in abstraction, but that's totally fine because they're two different type of customer. One is an abstraction type of customer. So it's kind of, again, going back to our, I think one of the first class we talked about packages is like your photo library. You don't dump all your photos into, well, maybe some of us do, right? But you just don't dump all into one folder. It's hard to organize it. So you do it based on, okay, London trip, Hawaii trip, weddings, this, that, graduation. So that's how you kind of, organize it. And then even if you go inside that, you can go into more modular base. So same thing with our code base, we do the same thing. And that's what packages are. There's some underlying rules and stuff, but that, I'm sure you can figure that out. It's not really complex. All right, what I really want to talk about is encapsulations, right? What is encapsulation? We have seen that already a little bit, but let's go into the main four concepts of object-oriented programming, right? And these are, almost kind of like a guarantee interview questions that's going to come from there, right? Because when your resume says, I have experience with working with object-oriented programming, which is this, right? Well, you have to explain what do you mean by object-oriented programming, right? So you got to talk about encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and then abstractions, right? So those are the four main, kind of like the heavy lifter when it comes to object-oriented programming. But these are just terms, right? We really need to understand what is encapsulation from a context of Java, right? So let's focus on that. So the idea behind encapsulation is to ensure that implementation details are not visible to users, right? So we want to make sure whatever the implementation is, that is not visible to the user. So for instance, we have this remote control, right? And it has some sort of circuit board that kind of drives it, right? So what we have to do is, all you know is that if you hit this button, it's going to turn off. If the TV is turned off, it's going to turn it on for you, right? And if it's turned on, it's going to turn it off for you. You don't care about what the implementation of that. Make sense? Right? So same thing with encapsulation is that concept. So let's say you're building, when you think of something like Amazon.com, there is no way you can understand every single code base, right? There's 1,000 of developers probably working on that, right? Your job might be just dealing with payments or login and registrations, right? Or, I don't know, like I said, search, or imagine search, like how that might be a massive team. Even within search, you might have a very dedicated role. So let's say you need something from another module, right? Like let's say payment or something. Now, are you going to learn how to do entire payment again? No way, you just can't do it, right? It's just too much work. But you need certain specific thing from a payment, like a method or function that does something for you, right? So you don't care about the implementation as long as what it's supposed to do for you, it's doing it for you, right? So just to kind of give you another example of scanner, when we talked about scanner, you did not care about how they build scanner, right? How they written their code. What is that one? Scanner dot next line. you never cared about that. All you wanted to know is that if I call this method and whatever the data I inserted, that's it's what's going to be taken from the console and put it into a variable, right? So just to put this in a context, so there is going to be a lot of time you're going to be building methods that other programmers going to have no idea about and they will not care about, right? But your code has to work as expected, right? So encapsulation is that way. We hide our data, we hide our implementation, we expose our method. So when they say, okay, I want to print pages, they know that, okay, if I call this and I pass in a number of pages that I want to print, that's what's going to do. But we've written some logics inside of it. That's not something they have to see, they have to worry about, right? Same way the way we've been using scanner, it doesn't matter how they build scanner. All we know is that if we call scanner, we can take data from a console and dump it into our variable, right? So that's what, in a high level, that's kind of how encapsulation works, right? Accessible only through methods of the current class. This is called data hiding. To achieve encapsulation in Java, declare the class variable as private. So we talked about that already, right? Make sure like your class variables are private, except for certain cases, which we are going to talk about. It can be public. And provide public setter and getter method to modify and view the variable values, right? So we can do those. For example, they're giving an example here, private double balance, right? So we make that private, and then we have public void deposit. So if you wanted to build, but you got to deal with balance every time you're dealing with deposit. You have to take the current balance that you have, and then you add to it whatever the money that you're adding into that account, right? And then it's the public void deposit and whatever the value that is. But you can only deposit positive values, right? You can deposit negative value, but it's just going to decrease your current amount more. So if x is greater than 0, right, then only I am going to add whatever the value that is entering. So we didn't really expose our variable, so to speak, right? But what we've done is we expose our deposit, but it's dealing with balance. So directly accessing balance may not be you don't probably need it right now, but there might be the case where you might want to see your current balance, but that's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about is like your field variables should be private. That's how we hide our data, and then your logic sits within your public method, and then you just expose your method. So if someone wanted to deal with deposit, they don't have to worry about the functionality and which value they're interacting with. All they care is that I'm going to call a method called deposit from bank account, right? And I'm going to dump the value that I need to dump there. That's it. So there's no way you can learn everything, every single implementation. So you just have to learn how to use existing functionality within your code base itself, right? So this implementation hides the balance variables. That's pretty much what it's saying. So in summary, encapsulation provides the following benefits: control of the way data is accessed or modified, more flexible and easy changed code, ability to change one part of the code without affecting the other parts, right? So there's a lot of things you can do with encapsulation, and you're going to see this in a little bit. And just to illustrate this, so you have your full class, right? And this is kind of, we're hiding everything inside of it, right? And we have green variables and red methods, but if you look at the capsules, right, it's actually red, so you can only access the method, but I'm hiding all my variables inside of it, right? So, so that's what we're going to be doing now. And like I said, the homework is really nice to add on to it. I promise you, Selenium is going to be very easy. And that's not exaggerating, because we are investing a lot of time on learning how to be a programmer first. So, like, I don't put a lot of effort on teaching Selenium. It's really easy. Because you already know what it is and what you have to do and break it down. You just have to know how to use the library, which is a pretty easier part. This is the part where, you can struggle, right? And that's okay. I'm okay with you struggling here, right? But when you get to the Selenium part, it's gonna be just come do lecture, you just do homework, and we're done with it. So don't feel too bad. Like it's not gonna continue to get harder. Once you're done with Java, it gets actually pretty simple. All right, so let's do one thing. Let's do drawing, right? What I want to build is kind of like a banking system, right? Not just a simple, guys. Let's focus, right? So let's say we're gonna have one class called account, and then we're going to have another class called customer. So let's assume our bank has something called account, and you can have an account, but if you don't have a customer, account doesn't make sense. So we have two things in our banks. We have a customer, and we have an account. So there's two different type of objects, but they kind of interact with each other. How do we make them interact with each other? That's what we need to find out. We need to identify which data is related to customer and which data is related to account, right? So if I tell you balance, where do you put this variable? That's kind of the difficult point to understand, when you are architecting a software, right? Like I said, your jobs are not going to be going in and making a lot of those decisions, right? But I want you to understand from that perspective. And then we have something called bank, right? So let's say this is what maybe our front end code base sees it, right? So let's say when they build chase.com and they want someone to register, they're accessing this class. So we're going to be hiding account and customer completely, and we're going to be exposing, let's say, or run our code through bank, right? So we'll call our code. So only thing we're really doing is what we're going to be doing is running our code. Our main method is going to be only here, and we're going to be registering customers. And what does a customer have? An account, right? So we need to start building those relationships, and so it's kind of like communicate that way. Account's going to go into a customer, right? Customer is going to carry on a lot of the account details related to that customer, right? And then when you come to the bank, someone like, let's say, a personal banker or someone, or yourself going online and create that bank account. Create the bank account from a customer point of view, like a user point of view, right? So, these are just 2, 3 classes that we're dealing with, but in real world you deal with a lot. But once you understand how things works, it doesn't matter how many classes. It's kind of like, again, riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bike on your neighborhood, you can ride anywhere you want, right? So that's kind of what you have to do. The concept of riding a bike doesn't change regardless you ride it in India or in US or Russia. It doesn't matter. Bike is a bike, right? It might be crowded in some places, but at the same time, that's what I really want you to understand, take away from today's class, is do I understand this fundamentally? And the only way I would know that you understood is that when you complete that homework, okay? So let's start working on this account object. So we'll start building the account first, and then we'll focus on building customer, and then we'll run the code, and then we'll go over the homework. Okay, perfect. let's do this. So we'll just call this package a back, all right? Right? Within this package, I need 3 classes, right? The very first class, what we need is what? Account, right? After account, we need another class called customer. And then obviously we need another class where we can actually execute our code base, right? So we'll just call it a bank. So we have 3 classes. So usually in real world, I mean, like I said, this is a very easy diagram, but based on the requirement, we will be building this out, right? We don't just start writing code on day one. We actually design this, architect this, all the wireframing and everything is done, and then actually go ahead and do the implementations, right? But once you kind of get a lot of experience, easier implementation, you might well just be able to do it, right? So kind of like if you can think of building a house or something, right? In fact, it costs more money to build software than buildings. So, so that's one thing to take away, how expensive this is to build a good software. All right, so let's build the account. What I want to do is I want to put balance here, right? Even though balance is part of customer, but it's also it kind of belongs to an account, right? Account. When we talked about, we don't say customer balance, we say what? Account balance. So we also try to understand the stories, right? When we're talking to our customer, we try to understand which context they're speaking from, right? So the story kind of tells us, okay, and you can argue that it could be on customer and rightfully so, and if there is a better way to do it, we can do this, but you don't also want to make it crowded. So we're going to abstract the balance inside of an account, right? When I say abstract or encapsulate, I'll say encapsulate the balance. Oh, we didn't get to abstraction yet. Encapsulate the balance inside of an account, right? So we'll say private double balance, right? Let's deal with balance here. Another thing I need is every time we create an account, we need an account ID. Make sense? So let's create an account ID. It'll be just a random string maybe. Well, maybe not a random string, but that's that. And then I need something else and I need a class data here, right? Some sort of a class data that keep tracks of the accounts, right? I can give an account ID, but think about something like account ID. It cannot be part of an object. It needs to be part of it cannot be part of an instance and need to be part of a class because we need to keep track of the IDs, right? So let's say you have an ID 001. Somehow I have to keep track of that. So when this person comes in, I'm giving 002, 003, and so forth. So this becomes a part of a class data. We talked about that, right? That's why we make it static. But I'm going to create this as private static. We'll just call it next ID. And somehow what I'm going to do is next ID equals to 0. So very initially, let's say this bank has no account just yet. So we're going to be counting from where? 0. All right. And then a very interesting one, and this is only case I would allow it to be public, right? Public static final int So think of a routing number is something that could be public, and I made it final, so you can't even change it. So there is no way to change it, but we don't also have to have a method, because since we are not going to set this value, all we're going to do is access them, and it's part of a class, it's not necessarily part of an instance. So we can make this public, and since we made it final, you don't have any way to change that. Make sense? Right? So that's So those are the 4 values we're going to be dealing with in account. So let's do the very first method that we wanted to expose.
Okay, question.
What's up?
Next ID also start.
Yes.
And last you talked about every static variable one must be capital letter.
Actually, like maybe that's incorrect. Every static final variable should be all capital letter. What this becomes is italicized, right? So every time you do a static, it will italicize it for you. So that's fine.
Just fine.
Just the final one, it can be all uppercase. And every new letter should be underscore. All right. So now we need to have a public, a void, a deposit. Let's say we want to have a method that allows us to make a deposit, right? So whenever we make a deposit, which variable gets affected here? Balance, excellent, right? Obviously. And then balance will make it double because obviously currency can be, right? And then we'll say a balance equals to whatever the balance is, and that will be plus the amount, right? So same thing, what we have to do, another method called public avoid withdraw, and then we'll call it double amount, and bam. Now we'll say balance equals to balance minus the amount. Are you guys with me so far? Right? So it's we're just kind of building the account object. All right. Then what we want to do is I would like to create a getter and setter for account ID. Because you might need to deal with you need to set an account ID at a certain point, but you also may need to deal with an account ID, a specific account ID for a user perspective. So you create an object and you need to maybe get this account ID in your statement or somewhere else, right? For that user. So therefore, what we're going to be doing is create an account ID getter and setter. Let's just create a setter for us. In fact, we don't really need the getter just yet, but I can just create this. Generate. Damn it. Account ID. And that's it. I'm not really doing anything here. Just have a getter and setter so I can access this value, right? And then what I want to do is create a static method. Remember, if you want to access this constant value, if you want to access a static field variable, you need a public static method, right? So that way I can access it. So I'll say public static get next ID, and this will be, let's make it a string. Again, this is not part of an instance. It's part of an account class, but it will not be part of an instance. So now when we say return, and we can form a string here. ACCT. So account number, whatever that account number is, and it will be your account dot next ID plus plus. So what we're doing here is that we're saying every time we create an account, we are going to keep a tally here, right? So let's say you first create an account, it'll be 0, right? Second time you create an account, this value will be 1. Oh, not you, someone else. So the bank is keeping track of how many accounts were created, and we are giving them unique ID every time. We can randomize this, right? But if we randomize it, it becomes a problem, right? Because it can still have the chance of duplications. But this way, we are just kind of going to be keep incrementing it, and we are safe to have it as an int because I don't think we're gonna exceed 2 billion something value as an account, right? So that's totally fine. And look, it ends up being a string anyway, right? So we're saying account number and whatever that value is, all right? So that's pretty much what our account object is. What we also want to do is, what's up here? Yeah, so because we are combining, you see how it's returning a string? We are concatenating two values. You are allowed to concatenate any type of mismatch data type. So if you have a string and double or account, any other object, what you can do is you can concatenate them, right? So you can add them as a string. So you're forming a new string. That's all it is. So yes, this is still an int, but this will be added to whatever that is, and we are returning as a string. So if you go back to our couple of homeworks, I've done that in a display, account informations or restaurant details and stuff like that, and formed a long string with all different data types. So that's totally fine. You're allowed to do that, right? Because in this case, we are not really dealing with int. We are just doing the computation, but after the computation, we are just returning into a string data type. Well, we also want to kind of print out account details. So let's say someone wants to see their account details. How do we do that? So let's print out some dummy account details. We'll say a public void display account details. All right. And we're going to say sub out come on information and then we will say we'll give the ID account ID, whatever the account ID will be formed, that will get spit out there. These are some of the stuff we've done in the restaurant examples, we've done in a user example, so this should not be new to you. And then we'll say balance, whatever that balance is. Whatever your balance, so you're getting your account information, you're going to get your account ID, you're also going to get your current balance, right? And we'll also throw in a routing number here. Routing number, and we'll say routing number. Right, so every time I call display account details, and if you created an account, you're going to get all of those values. If you never created an account and you call this, you're going to get null values, right? So it's nothing existed. All right, so this is our first account object. What we're going to do is take a break. Once you come back, we'll do our customer object, and then we'll run them through by bank, and then we'll go over some assignment work. All right? Any questions from online?
Can you go over that account.next ID one more time?
This one?
The one about the public static string. get next ID.
Yeah.
That.
So this one, I'm just forming a new string. So every time I need to deal with the next ID, like let's say I need to find out which ID should I be assigning, right? So like let's say you created, um, let's say your friend created an account with ID 0, right? I want to call this, so make sure I'm incrementing 1 to the next account. So let's say your friend created an account, and then now you want to create an account, make sure you get a unique ID. So what we're gonna be is keeping tally of every account that gets created in this bank, and then we'll always give you whatever that last account is and add 1 to it. I don't know if that makes sense. So what we can do is just wait up on this one. On the next example where we actually use it, it would make a little bit better sense. All right?
And the reason why we assign static is because we want it to be accessed across
Yes, because
all
it's a
classes.
class data. Even though it is a we will be taking this data and dump it in here at some point, right? So that will be belong to you, but the next ID will be belong to the bank itself, right? Because they need to keep tally of the account IDs, so they're not duplicating the account ID for another user. Make sense?
Yeah.
Uh, what is that?
Account ID or next ID?
Account ID would be part of an instance
Yeah.
for you. But you will have a dedicated account ID. Next ID will keep track of it for the bank use. Yes. So
Why the custom? The account, right?
Different color from here. Because of this.
So Mohammed, the account ID will actually, I'm sorry, the next ID will keep a track of just the number of accounts created, or will it also store like the actual number of the account ID?
no, we're not gonna keep track of account number of the account ID. We can do that later, right? But for now, we just want to make sure everyone gets an unique ID. That's all.
Okay.
Did you speak to Robin?
I talked with him on the phone.
That should work. You don't have to put account in the front. This one. Because account doesn't exist. This is customer. So you're calling. That's why you have to follow the thing because you're trying to call it from account, but you create it in customer. So it doesn't make sense. No, no, I'm just messing with you. Static is part of the class data, so I can access it without creating a new object. So you know how we create object, like account equals to new account. So we don't have to do that to access the value. You can directly just say account dot and then access the value. But if it's private, you cannot still access it. So what we have to do is you have to create a static method so then it can allow you to access it. All right.
Because we don't recorded two classes, yeah? We have,
Yeah.
This
That's
is
how.
because I think every record two class.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to customer object.
You call customer class or customer object?
It doesn't matter.
No,
Either way
which
is
one
fine.
correct way?
Either one is fine. You're gonna hear both.
If I say customer class,
That's fine. If you say customer object, they're both gonna be fine. All right. So we'll say private string first name. So customer has a what? First name, right? That cannot be part of an account because that's kind of belongs to a customer. And say private string last name, right? And then private, we'll call it. So customer also has something called what? Account. So customer has a first name, last name, and an account. So what we're going to be doing is account we just created. Account we just created, we are going to be using in customer now. Okay? So we'll say, come on. So what will be the data type? What will be the data type of an account?
No.
Whoa. You guys guessing? Account, for my account will be the account data type, right? So it would be like users, restaurants, right? Remember? So it will be like an account. I like how you guessed a lot of things, but it's just an account, okay? So this account, it's itself, we just created a new data type. Just like string, we just created a new data type called account, and that belongs to you. Now think about it, how customized it is, right? It has nothing to do with Java at this point, right? We're not using external library. We are starting to build our own library based on our business, right? Whatever our business is, that's what we are going to start building it. So at some point, it gets to a point where you only see the code. You start to create library for your own company because there might be things only belongs to your company as an Amazon or Google or whatever. Okay. Yeah, yes, I am recording now. That's good though. And then I'm going to create something that I don't want you to worry about right now. This is going to apply to you in homework. So I'll create another thing called private string user IDs equals to full bar and game GOT. Okay, don't worry about this one. I will going to explain it later, right? What these are. But now I would like to also I want to have two constructor. One constructor is with parameters, and one is default one. So if they don't provide any name, we are going to give name as John Doe, right? So let's say you created an account, and for whatever weird reason they don't want to give a name, we'll just say John Doe. So if anyone is John Doe, we know it's a fake account. All right. So the very first one would be public. Remember how it works. We need to have the same name as the class name, and then we'll set the first name equals to John, and then the last name equals to Doe. And then we'll create another constructor. You can have as many constructors you want, long as the signatures is different. When I say signature means parameters and things like that, those are different. So we create another one. And you see how it's going to throw an error? Because it doesn't see any parameters here, right? They both became same, so the compiler doesn't know which one to use. So in this case, the only way you can differentiate it is if you start adding. Come on. First name, string, last name, right? And then we'll say this, because now we need this, right? Because we need to differentiate between the local variable versus the field variable, right? So this first name equals to the local first name. Then this last name equals to the local last name. And then there's two more methods and we're done here. Any questions so far? All right. We have a customer who has a first name, last name, accounts, and I'm just keeping the user IDs for different purpose, okay? And then we are having customers and customer two constructor. One is a default one. So if the user doesn't provide a customer details, first name or last name, we're going to dump John Doe as their name, all right? And then we'll create, obviously we need to have something called add account, right? Add account, let's say double initial balance. So when you create an account, I would like to also want you to put some money into your account, right? So you can't create an account without some balance, right? So something you should add some value there, right? So we can do that. And see, we've declared an account object here, or variable in this case, but we've never initialized it, right? The only way we initialize this is how? Account equals to new account, right? But that's not where I want to initialize it. I only want to initialize it when someone is creating an account. I may have other stuff within this object, right? So for instance, I may have transaction or something, right? That may not have nothing to do with the account. So I don't want to keep initializing stuff that I don't want to use. So in this case, it's like, one of the examples is like, it's not raining, but you had the windshield on as you start the car, right? So you keep driving the car, but it's not raining, but you only want to initialize it when it rains, right? So that's kind of one of the dummy analysis to, replicate real life scenario. So if you initialize it there, yes, it will work. You might say, well, Mohammed, it's working. Yes, same thing with windshield. You can drive, even if it's a sunny day, you can still have the windshield going back and forth, and you can still drive. So I want to make sure that there's a purpose for everything. We only want to initialize it when we create an account, when we add an account. If we're doing other things, we can, like 2 months later, this class can have 500 or 1500 lines of code, right? And everything's not going to pertain to account. So you don't want to keep initializing values as you kind of, introduce them. So that's why we declared it in the top, but we only initialize it when they create an account. So we can say something like this. We'll say account equals to new account. Make sense? So this is where we initialized it. And now here, this is what we want to do. When we create an account, we want to give this account an ID, right? So we'll say account dot, and we have something, right? Set account ID. Remember, we have something like this here. We set the account ID, and the account ID will be whatever the next value is. But this account ID will belong to that specific customer, right? But we'll keep tracking of the count as a class object. So what we do is here is we just say, hey, whatever the previous ID was, increment 1 to it, right? So this method pretty much does that for you, right? Remember? Whatever your last ID was, I'm going to add 1 to it. So, and whatever that new value is, that's going to be your account ID. So when you say account.get account ID, that will be your account ID. But if you say get.next ID, that will be part of the entire bank's like list of the whole account IDs, right? So and then maybe I want to do this. I also want to, right after I add an account, I would like to print or display my account details. So I would like to see my account ID, I would like to see my balance and routing number, whatever. And tomorrow it might be something else. Maybe you want to see all the most recent transaction that you made, or the value that you withdraw, right? Or deposited, or whatever may be the case. So we can get all of those details in here as we add new details into the display account card, right? Is it making sense? Right? Are you guys following? Or a little bit lost? And then what we're gonna do is let's also print out first name and last name, right? We can say out first name. Okay, I can copy this, and we can say last name. We can do it here, or if that's something is really important to you, you can make that into a variable here, right? We'll just say string first name, string last name. We'll go back to the customer. We'll delete these 2 lines. And right, so now if we go back here, we can just pass in our field variable as the first name. And remember, when you are initializing your customer object, you're forced to give the first name. If you don't give one, we'll give you one called John Doe, right? So there is no way to get away from that. So you can always call this back into the same object. So now display the account details with the first name, last name, and also some default stuff from the account object itself. So you can keep tailing this and keep adding more details into your display account details card. All right, so I'll stop here. Only functionality we have right now is add account, right? But we can get fancy for the homework. We can also delete the account, right? So think about it. We can keep track of the IDs, and then we can keep deleting them as you come. You know, someone say, "Hey, I don't. You know, I want to close my account. I want to delete it." It's hard to find that button in any company, right? But whatever may be the case, you know, someone wants to deactivate it or delete it, and let's see how we can figure that out for the homework. But for now, let's create the object, which is on bank. And this is where we need the main method, right? PSVM. And let's do something here. I'll move this to the right. I'll move this to the bottom. So now you're messing with 3 different classes. So whenever you're working with multiple classes, which you're going to do all the time, right? You might want to split things like this so you get to see what's where, so you're not completely lost. So we're not really going to do much with this account. There is a part that I missed. I just realized that I'm not calling a deposit. So you see how we created an account? I mean, we taking an initial balance, but where are we dumping that, right? So there is a bug here. So what we want to do is right after we set this, we want to say account dot, because when you're setting an initial balance, it's a form of a deposit, right? You're making a deposit as you created the account, right? So we'll say initial balance. So now, whatever the balance, if you decided to create an account with $200, it will add 200 to your balance object. So it will bypass. So you're going to be entering it here. This will take it here, right? And pass this through this method and finally store it into this balance object, right? So it goes through almost 1, 2, 3 calls before it gets to your balance. So you see how much secure you're making your balance data, because that's important. Ultimately, this is what the company really cares about, right? Because that's what stores your data, and we need to protect it as much as we can. All right, so let's see if this works now. So every time we create a customer, so let's say customer, and we call it customer 1 equals to new customer, right? Now we have an option here. We have an option to either pass in the full name, first name and last name. We also have an option to not pass in anything. But so let's, sake of testing, right? Let's not pass in anything. And then we say customer 1 dot add account with the value $200, right? And if I run this code, then you're going to see account information. ID of the account is 0, which is fine. The very first value is 0. The balance is $200. Routing name number is 1, 2, 3, 4. First name is John and last name is Joe. We just have to add a space here. You see how we're not adding any space? That might be bug somewhere, right?
No. There. First name, last name.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So it's really not a bug, it's a typo. But you see, when you're doing a live coding, you're finding bugs, right? So, last name. Good? I think that should fix it. So if we run our code. Okay, so we are getting the fake name, right? So John Doe means the company knows it's a fake account. We need to do something about it, right? Any questions on how we ran this? But now let's say we give a name. So you're flexible now, right? You can have constructor take name. And if we run this code, you're getting an account for 0, balance 200, routing number 1, 2, 3, 4, Mohammed, and that's kind of the details of that user, right? Now let's create another user. And I have a questions coming up after that. Customer, let's say 2 equals to new customer. Let's call it right, and I would like to add an account as well. So customer 2 dot add account, and maybe initial balance is $500, right? What do I expect to see? And raise your hand. what do I expect to see if I run this code base? Mohammed?
ID when they change to number one, ID account.
Okay. So you'll be
The first one give me 0. This when we run, give me number one.
okay. And then it will
After that, new name, balance 500.
okay, that's good.
Account routing number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. All right. So let's do this.
Account information.
Not bad, right? He was able to guess this. Well, not guess this. He knew what it was, right? So account ID is 0, but you get to see now, account ID is being incremented every time, right? And we were able to form the string however we wanted to do it, right? So that's one way to think. But now let me ask you this. If I run this code, what do I expect to see? If I run this code again, what will be the account ID? 3, right?
Same.
Why same?
You don't add the.
Wait. Everyone's answering at once. I
You
can't hear.
didn't add the new customer.
I just added 2 customers.
Yeah, too. But if you add customer 3,
Okay, so let's say I add a customer 3, right? Let's say I add testmate, right? So that's a customer 3, is it?
no.
Why is it not customer?
Okay,
Okay, so
You're running it. You're not saving it. You're just running it.
no, it's the same customer, but you
But it
change
just
the name.
zero
only.
one.
no, but that's not the problem here, right? It's not the customer is not the problem here. So if I run this code, you can have a customer with the same name. That's like right. That's not a problem here. We can have a customer with the same name. Why are we getting caught up on that? What I'm saying is, what would happen to an ID if we already had 2 customers with the same ID, and if tomorrow they come in and run this code with new customers, what will be the new ID for those customers? You want to try answering that?
I'm not getting it. Like the same code without any new customers.
No, think of these are 2 new customers again, right?
Okay.
So let's say we added 2 customers yesterday. We are adding 2 customers today. So initially, when we added first 2 customers, when we opened the business, the IDs were 0s and 1s. So if I add another 2 customers right now, what will be the IDs?
3, 4.
Okay, one sec.
Initializing to 0. So it's going to run that code again. So 0, 1, it's going to
Yeah, so it's more programmatic. Like I want to kind of clear that out for you guys. In real world, what we're going to do is we're going to keep saving this ID into a database somewhere else, and then we'll read it from there. We are not going to be so soon as you run your code, so think of, and this code will be always running in some sort of a server. But if they reset that server, all the data is cached out. Does that make sense? So this is called garbage collection. When we're running our code, once while it's running, it keeps the data in the memory. But as soon as it finishes running, it wipes it out, right? So everything kind of resets again, right? So in theory, in real world, what's gonna happen is you see this next ID, this is going to come from like something like get db dot table dot id, something like that, right? So you always, whatever the last value is going to be stored into a database, and is always going to read the last value from, because we externally saved it into another Excel sheet. Think of like an Excel sheet. It's not within our code base. We had to put it out somewhere else. So when you reset, and a database server, even if you reset it, you still have the data available. But the way all this code, not just Java, right? They are right after they finish running, or if you restart your server, it will reset everything back to initialize to 0. Make sense? So this is not something like you really have to worry about, but something you need to understand why it's always coming back as 0s and 1s, 0s and 1s, right? Because in theory, we are always initializing at 0. But in theory, it would be, in real world, it would be read from the database, all right? Okay. Any questions? No? So this is what I'm going to do now. I think it's a lot. I mean, we had a pretty long lecture today. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go over the homework, but I want you to start working on it. And then there are a few individuals I want to talk to you, right? About the program on Saturday. We want to do a boost up session for some of you who are, need a little bit of extra help or, a little bit behind. If you're able to do the homework, 80 to 85%, that's fine. You don't need that session. But for those who are struggling a little bit, I feel like, maybe we can help a little bit more to bring you up a little bit better, right? But some of you guys struggling because you're just taking the class as an experiment, right? If that's the case, hey, just tell me. Like, I'm not gonna bother with you too much. But if you're doing it to get a job and all that, then I think you got to put in a little bit more hard work, right? But if you're doing all of that stuff, this is not going to pertain to everyone. If you're struggling, let's see if we can do something. But this is the homework. Let's just go over the homework and then. So homework is the very first thing is when opening account, customer must enter user ID. So now what we are doing is we're taking first name and last name, which is fine, but I also want to take in user ID, right? So they can log back in or whatever may be the case. The minimum, when they're selecting user ID, the minimum should be 3 characters long. It cannot be one that which is already taken from user IDs list. So if you remember, I created a user ID list. Where did that go? Yeah. You see how now you are going to use that. So think of this is your database, right? So in theory, that's how database data will come in. You're just not going to see it. It will be just like thousands of them, right? But in our case, if you can do those 4, you can do millions. It doesn't make a difference, right? So you need to first iterate through this and make sure this doesn't exist. The user ID that a user selected, make sure it doesn't exist there. If it's there, return -1. No, so just kind of say invalid user ID or something. Print out some stuff. Make sense so far?
Yes.
Right? Probably like, oh, this is super easy. So what we have to do is the homework might be a little bit easy, but I just want to see how you move data around, right? Because what goes in an account, what goes in the customer. So those are the things like you really need to understand. User must select password, which must follow following. So obviously user ID, and they also need to select a password. And password must have minimum 8 characters long. It should be alphanumeric and must not contain username. I know some of you guys use regex to do that. What I mean by alphanumeric is that it cannot be all numbers and it cannot be all letters, right? So there should be some numbers and at least one number or one letter is part of your username. Make sense? Must not contain username. So whatever the user ID was, make sure that's not part of your username as well. And now, let's go into the, so far are we good with the first 2? All right. The third one is, once account is created and initial balance is set, users should be able to withdraw money from their account, right? So we are able to deposit now, but right after I add an account, how can I withdraw certain value? So they cannot withdraw more than what they have in the account. For example, if the balance is 300, and they should not be allowed to withdraw anything greater than 300, which makes sense, right? We did not go over date. I wanted to go over date today, but you can ignore this. We can also set the date when they created the account, right? So date is a new thing that I wanted to kind of go over, but instead of date, what we can do is, I mean, it's up to you guys. You can cover date if you want. Oh, perfect. So we'll just leave that here. So after our date class, we will create, right? We just reach 8:30. So you can create the account date after that, right? So I want to find out where do you put this? Do you put this in a customer or do you put this in an account? Let's see you make a right decision and just try to write in a comment why you put that in an account, okay? And listen, it's justifiable both ways. It's not like a right or wrong, but as long as you understand where does this date thing goes, where does it belong? A part of a customer, or part of an account, or maybe part of a new class that we haven't introduced yet, right? So just mess around with all of that. Number 5, user should be able to delete account. So this one is very interesting, right?
Can you explain
Maybe. So, you know how we add an account? But what makes it an account? ID, right? What if we keep track of that ID somehow? If we keep track of that ID and somehow, if we say, okay, you created an account, and everything has to be sequential. So we're not really building a world-class applications. So you're just going to say, okay, you create a customer, right? You add an account, you try to withdraw something, and then you try to delete something. So you keep tracking everything.
You did it like first time when we
No,
saw
we're not.
objects.
We're not deleting anything. We added an account, right? So what we're gonna do is try to figure out, and this is kind of an extra credit. So if you don't know how to do it, that's totally fine. But see if you can figure out where to track the ID and make sure you're only deleting that specific ID account. All right?
It's easy delete to account.
Sorry? Yes, of course. This is the one that you probably have to create another method. We call it method in Java, function in JavaScript, but that's fine. It's not wrong. It's just different name. User should be able to delete account. Again, this is kind of an extra credit, but try to work with the first 4. Those are the ones that's going to take some time anyway. Don't get to delete account right away. Get to that one last. All right, so let's start with the next thing. And so every time, guys, let's just go over this real quick. I know we're all tired, but let's just cover this. Dishan wanted to go over dates today, so. um, so what we have to do is deal with something like date. Date is something is always there, right? Like your birth date, your starting date, anniversary date, all of those, like so many dates, travel dates, right? The creation of the account date, deletion of the account date, right? Range of dates. So much we do with dates. Like I don't see how you can code without knowing how to deal with dates. So therefore, what we have to first do is you see how this checking is? One of your exercise is going to be in, I guess like in few weeks, is to always select tomorrow's date as the check-in date, and the return date should be, no, not that quick, right? So return date would be like, let's say, 7 days from tomorrow's date. 7 days from tomorrow's date, right? So let's say if we select tomorrow, well, let's go back here. What is tomorrow? Would be Friday. And the return date may be 7 days. And then you gotta verify that this displays 7 nights. But think about it. The target for tomorrow is always changing, right? So tomorrow, if you hard code this to 5.3, that's not gonna work. So you have to calculate those dates. What is the current date today? I want to select tomorrow's date, and then based off that. So whenever there's a student comes in and say, hey, I don't want to go to your class, I just want to go to the job program. I just give them this test. So far, no one has passed it. So I think so far no one was able to sign up to the job program. I will not take anyone to job program unless they completely know what they're doing, right? So if you're able to solve something like that, you have a good chance of getting hired. So the reason I'm trying to explain this to you, it has nothing to do with Selenium. right? It has everything to do with how you actually know how to do Java programming. So the misconception of test automation is that, oh, I can just watch some Selenium videos. It's just you're just not going to be a good engineer. Yes, you may land a job here and there, but you're not consistently going to be successful. But when you're learning from a programming point of view, it's not just Selenium. Tomorrow you might want to do an Android development. You might want to do a backend engineering. I have people that graduated from here and that's doing different things. They're not just doing test automation anymore, right? So you may not like test automation after a year, but that's the way to kind of get in. And then if you say, oh, I want to be a SQL developer or whatever may be the case, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's going to be easier route for you, right? So logic like something like this, you have to know how to deal with dates. And like I said, I just gave like 10 examples of where dates is applied. You're always going to have to deal with dates. Now, you're not just dealing with dates, you're dealing with formats. Every date is a different format. In here, you have month slash days slash year in 2 digits. There might be a case where the year is 4 digits, right? There might be a case where month is first 3 letter. There might, right? So you see how many crazy way it can go. So we need to make sure we're not just dealing with dates, we're also dealing with format, the right format. Because if you don't give right format in this field, it's going to keep throwing error. Because whoever built this, they made sure that you're giving the right format here, otherwise it's going to keep throwing errors for you. So all of those calculation is very thoughtful and you have to really think about it and build those up. But before we get there, let's see if we can solve some of those date problems for us. So I have some pre-written code. Just lazy right now to type this out. So let's say if you want to create, I'm gonna unhook this. There are multiple libraries that you can deal with dates, right? So the very first one I want to kind of go over is called date. You see how we have an account object? Similarly, someone at some point built a date object that everyone can use across the globe, right? So this date object, every time you say date equals to new date, and you pass in a date object here, and if we run this, it would always print this date. It's not a string. It's not a string. It looks like a string, but it's really a date, right? It's a date object. So you get Thursday, May 2nd, 2037, whatever the hour, right? Eastern Time, 2019. But this doesn't fulfill our requirement. If your requirement was to enter the date in this format, how can we take this date and convert it into that format so that our application understands or our user understands? So now that's when we need to get a help from another library, which is called simple date format. And I'm just going to flash out. And so these are the libraries. You see how we had the scanner? So now you're importing simple date format and you're also importing date. And we're also going to be importing calendar in a little bit, right? So now what happens is we are saying, hey, create a simple date format and you can give this pattern, right, as a constructor value. How would you like to build in your date, right? Because by default, you're getting this junk, right? I don't need all of this. So I just need to get a date in month, day, and a 4-year format, right? So let's say if I run this code, but once I set it to a constructor, whatever that value is, I can just say ft.format, which date would you like to format, right? So in this case, we are formatting this date object, which is the current date. Every time you print the date object, it's creating the current date. How it's happening, we're going to learn something called toString at the end, and that's how they build it. So it's by default, it's storing some data into this date object, right? But that's something.
Format is library method,
yeah? It's you see how simple date format? This is the method inside of this object, right? Again, it's kind of like scanner. Remember when we did scanner and then we said scan dot next line? Similarly, someone has built this for us so we can format the date into the format that we want it to be, all right? Now you might be asking, how do I know all of this? Well, there's a documentation for that, and we're going to go over that in a little bit. And you see how your date now, it's a little bit more prettier, right? So it's a 05, but in 02, 2019. And then the question is, well, how to convert a string to a date, right? So now let's say so this is like we're able to get the date formatted in, but now let's say you get a string. So every time, because you cannot say this string greater than other string, right? We can't do that. So we have to say, is today's date is is it less than tomorrow, so to speak, right? Does that make sense? So when we can compare string to each other, I cannot say Muhammad is greater than John, but I can say, the day is next year from today is greater than today, right? Does that make sense? Or the day from today, 2018 is greater than 2017, right? So in that case, how do we do that? Because it looks like a string, right? So we have to convert those strings. So they want to find out, hey, when you first come in here, what day is today? Default value should be greater than current date. Let's say that's a requirement. How are you going to calculate that? Because this is not a mathematical value. It's not like 0505. It's not really a value, right? So what we have to do is, it is a mathematical value. Like this is just the one that, but under the hood. But just to kind of sake of example, we have to do something like that. And then we'll comment this out. And we'll say, well, this is our formatter. This is the format that I would like to get. I would like to get the day first, month after, maybe we're in Europe, right? And then we're getting the year later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We can also format these dates based on country, based on time zone and all of that stuff, right? So we can get fancy with like, okay, if the current location's time zone is Europe, maybe they want to see the format in a different way, right? And a lot of applications that you will work that is across globe. So you may have to deal with languages and this and that. So, and then you have to write a logic to test all of those scenarios. And let's say you have string, date in string. So this is a string, let's assume we got it from the hotels.com, right? And then you create date, and you see how we have the formatter, like simple date format, we can use that again. Formatter.parse. So if you're converting from date to string, you will use format. If you're converting string to a date, then you have to use parse, like you're parsing the value. So you're saying format.parse date in string, and you print out the date, system out format. You can put it back as a date here as well, right? But one thing to take away here is that whatever the pattern that you choose here, that has to be the pattern for your date. So you need to first find out what's the pattern that they're using for the date. So for example, if we run this code, at some point, sorry. We have to first parse it, and then we have to then format it, right? So what we're doing is, first we have to parse it, and that when you're parsing it, your pattern and your date format has to match each other, right? So let's say your date is 2 digits instead of 4 digits. And let's see what kind of error we get. It's not really throwing an error right now because, so let's just do another month here. Because it just put 0019 by default, 2019, and then we'll run this. So you kind of got that error here, right? Because your format, you say, I want maybe the short month, like Jan, Feb, March, right? But your date came off as two-digit month value, right? So you have to make sure your pattern matches the date that you're dealing with, right? And this date could be coming from hotels.com to your another application and whatnot, or whatever the customer wants you to do. If you want to do it 2 digits, and we get rid of this, and maybe just get rid of, and this is the date format that hotels.com is using. And you see how you got 7. So very first time when you format it and you parsed it, the date, we were able to get the date, right? And whatever that day was, Friday, June 7, the time is 00, so 12 o'clock. And then you were able to parse that, format that date however you want it as a string. Now, one second. Let's say if you wanted to, instead of a slash, you wanted to do dashes, right? So you need to make sure the format also has dash here, and then also try to do this thing. And it will, so however you want it, it would pretty much work. There's not much I can do in this one. I know you're looking at me. Any questions? What do you want me to do on that one? It's raining. Is it leaking? Okay, then it's fine. Any other questions? Go ahead.
When we correct formatting, date must be lowercase, and month must be in the uppercase, and year lowercase.
No, there are
This
there are
makes sense or
times because we're gonna go over the documentation later. So there are times month could be lowercase. There is a reason for that. So we're just gonna go over that. Yeah.
It must be lowercase, yeah? Okay.
No, what I'm saying is this can mix match depend on the requirement. So sometimes it could be uppercase, sometimes it could be lowercase. But there is a documentation that was gonna explain when is it uppercase, when is it lowercase. Make sense? All right. So that was one library that we can deal with, but there's another library that we can always mess around with. It's called, we'll use the simple dot format. Just a disclosure, dates with Java is the worst thing. So yeah, so don't feel too bad. It's not something that any programmer likes to deal with. It's like they have the worst libraries to deal with. So if you struggle, it's normal. So don't feel too bad.
How do you know which library to use?
That's the experience, right? It's not something. But these are the most common ones that we're going over. So the date one, the most likely you're gonna use the calendar one. But here's a question here. So this is the pattern that I would like to get: year, month, date, hour, um, minutes, and second. You see how uppercase M represents month, right? And then lowercase m represents minutes. So the case sensitive is important in Java. So just make sure that you're using the right one. And then we are creating a calendar year, right? So we're saying calendar, a new Georgian calendar. So this is the new thing that you're getting introduced to. You might say, well, the left side has a calendar object, but the right side has some other type of object, right? This is called inheritance, and we're going to learn that later. So you can actually, the parent object can instantiate child object. And not something that you need to get confused about right now, but for now, just use this code base if you wanted to deal with it. And I am setting the year to 2019, month to 0, which is January, and day of the month to the day of the month to 31. Make sense? And then, sorry, any question? Oh, because I would like to get the short names of the month, right? And like I said, I'm gonna go over this in a little bit. There's a documentation for that. It's not just like magically dumping some stuff there. I know it sounds like I know this thing, but I don't. Every time you gotta deal with dates, you have to go in and you have to read this document. Don't try to memorize all of those stuff. It doesn't matter. There's no point of memorizing it. Fundamentally understand what you're trying to do, and then you look into documentation and you go over it. So, and then finally we are saying get the time for that year. We're just dealing with that year at that point, right? So when we say get time, it will give us the date in this format for the year that we just set. We are just messing with here. And then if you wanted to get, let's say, you see how you say year? So if you just want to get the year, so you say calendar.get and then calendar.year, right? What kind of data type do you think this is? Is this a class data or an object data? The year out. When I say calendar.year, is this a class data or is it class data, right? Because I am not creating, I'm not calling it from, you see how the calendar I just created? That I created, got it from an object data, which belongs to a calendar. But you see how this one was directly called and it's all uppercase? So chances are this is final at some point. Does that make sense? Okay. The next thing is the month. If you wanted to get month, you would get month this way. If you wanted to get day of the month, right? You can get day of the week, so forth, and all of those different type of things. So let's try printing out all of that, and we can quickly go over it. And like I said, you're going to deal with dates, unfortunately. So just, bear with me on this one. And then we'll run this code base. Let's see what happens. And look, we're getting all this junk data, right? So year was 2019, month was 0, day of the month is 31, day of the week is 5th, year of the week is 5th, week of the month, hour, whatever, we just set the 0. We didn't set anything for hours, months, days, all right? So that's another way of accessing individual elements, right? So maybe you're calculating fiscal years and things like that if you're into financial world. So you're gonna have to deal with weeks instead of like a month and things like that. So if you're dealing with 52 weeks, so you're probably going to have to rely on those calendar dot number of weeks. If it's greater than that, then whatever. Like it's just so much calculation then that can play a role at that point. Now, any questions? So this is, you can practice it, and that's the only way to learn it, this thing, to be honest. The next question that I want to kind of go over is telling me to breathe now.
Yeah. You were telling the same thing to us. Now you sit down.
It's all Jishan wanted to do.
Well, murder, I got that some
I'm going to comment on this stuff. And I'll share this with you, so don't worry about it. So let's say we have, let's say if you want to subtract from a date, you want to do some sort of subtraction, right? So you might be saying, well, we don't have, this is not really a map, but under the hood it's a map, right? When we started counting dates from in computer world, we started to it's just like a Unix key, it just keeps incrementing a value, right? In milliseconds. So it is actually a string, but someone was kind enough to make it more, broke it into year, month, and days and stuff like that. But under the hood, it is a value, right? But if you wanted to, let's say, subtract from a date, so obviously first you have to get your pattern right, and then set the date to some year, right? Let's say we are dealing with, so in this case, if you wanted to do the current year, you'll just get the current year here, current month here, and current date here. So that will set up the current year, right? But in our case, let's say we are dealing with 20, for some reason, maybe we are doing some computation for 2013, right? And so that's how we set that date. And then we are saying SDF dot format calendar dot get time. And then we say it's pretty easy to actually add the month. So calendar, and you use the object that we just created, calendar, use a dot, and then use the constant values, right, the static ones, calendar dot month, and what is the amount, right? So I would like to add month to an existing date that I have set out here, which is the calendar, right? So so in this case, the month was 10. In our case, we are going to add 1 to it, right? So then the month becomes 11, which is, in other word, is December, right? We started the count from 0. Same thing with subtracting. So if you wanted to maybe subtract 10 days from the existing calendar, right? So you can say calendar.add, calendar.day of the month, and amount -10, and so forth, right? Now if I give you this homework, you have some direction to go with, right? So, no, not yet, not just yet. I know, but we're getting there.
Here's a question.
Does Selenium have a shortcut for
No, libraries you have to make your own days. So, but that's good. That's something, everybody has to go through this, and there's nothing special for you guys, so it's gonna be the same thing. Like I say, Java is pretty bad with dates. That's one of those things. But don't go into create too many libraries. There's like 5, 6 out there. Just stick to one and just work around it and figure it out. And there's enough documentation out there. What I want to kind of do is, you see this is the documentation I want to go over. And you're going to have some homework on dates as well.
The Oracle company owns.
Yeah, Oracle owns Java. So you see how we have this pattern that I was able to find? It's pretty much here, right? If you want to do with week in a month, week in a year, so if you're doing a formatting, you're going to mess around with these days, right? So what I want you to do, it's a lot of homework this week, right? But I'll skip some homework on Monday. So if you cannot do the day stuff, but if you cannot do the days, you can complete the number 4 homework that we have, right? So try to get under it. Try to complete the first 3 tasks that I gave you for encapsulations. Once you're done with that, learn dates, right? Because then you have a reason to learn it, right? Because if you don't learn these, you can't do the other thing, right? So it's kind of like that's how I feel is the best way to learn, right? When I'm in a company and I want to work in a complex project, I don't go and open a book and start learning that, because that's not the right way to do it. I like to, put in a position to do it, and if I don't do it, I can't move forward, right? So That's one strategy, and also pays pretty well. So it's a good reason to be motivated when you're getting paid and when you're getting experience, right? It's the same thing with you guys. You're not getting paid, but you're getting experience. So make sure you kind of just learn that way. So finish those first 3 tasks, learn the dates, and then get to this, and then also see if you can figure out the delete. So I mean, you have 3 days to work on this stuff, and we'll go over it on Monday as well, right? So the homework is you have to convert this date into a string format. So whatever that Friday, June 7, 2013. And then you have to convert this date into a string as well. So this is the one that's going to be a little bit harder. Not really harder. You just have to mess around with that documentation I just provided, which is not so friendly either. Any question? And you can Google this stuff around. So it's totally fine. How to convert something or things like that. Any questions? Remember, this is a PM, AM, and PM, so it's not a military time. So, that's kind of a trick here as well. Any questions? Are we good? Yeah, I know it's a lot of materials, but as you kind of get started, it's really not a lot. And if you can do certain things, that's totally fine. But look, just give some effort, and we'll take it from there. You guys have done harder homework, so it's just a new thing to learn. That's all.
Can you write this how it looks like after the conversation?
Which one? This?
No, first and second. We need to convert Friday, June 7,
No, this is the output.
Oh, this is
Yeah.
You should convert the first one.
Whatever that date is, right? I want you to convert this date in this format, because that otherwise the date will come like this. Otherwise, so when you run,
ये रज़ा explain करेंगे.
you're gonna get something like this. You see, every time you print it. So I want you to kind of clean it up and print it in these two formats.
wouldn't they?
No, 2013. That specific dates. Okay, that's fine.